We are here to welcome tonight Angie Cruz. I met Angie over 20 years ago after her first book came out. We were at an event, and I don't know why this is so clear in my head. We were at an event at Teachers and Writers, which no longer exists, I don't think. And you were with, who were you with? You were with Nelly Rosario, I believe, at the time. So 360, we were on a panel together a couple of years ago, and boom, here Angie is. We're enjoying the heck out of her book. This is your third book, is that correct? So we've invited Angie to answer questions, to participate in the conversation, to build on all the questions that we've been having, and all the words and paragraphs and pages that we've been loving. So with that said, Brandon Janice is the actual facilitator of the book club, so she'll be leading the conversation. I will not talk again for the rest of the evening unless I have a super important question to ask. But everyone here has questions, and I think everyone here has been enjoying the book. So hopefully, also, please everyone keep in mind, even though Angie is here, we haven't finished reading the book. Please do not, jump ahead. Sometimes it's hard not to, but please try not to jump ahead and give any spoilers or anything like that away. If you can, as much as you can, try not to give any spoilers away. But yeah, Brandon, you wanna start doing your thing?
Yeah, for sure. Welcome, Angie. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's nice to have you here. We've really been enjoying this book. We've been enjoying Ana's story. But I've noticed in the past 3 sessions since we've been reading this book, what really gets the conversations going, what really kind of livens up folks in the room, is when we're kind of discussing your style and the craft and the way history is weaved into the narrative, right? So I know we have lots of questions and lots of people on tonight. So how about this? I'll start. Can you start us off by maybe speaking to some of your intentions, right, with adding history to this narrative? I'm talking about Malcolm X assassination, the tension between America and DR, classic television, and I Love Lucy, like at the time. Can you talk about just a little bit, kind of to get us started, some of your intentions with that? Because this very well could have been just Ana's story, right? It's rich enough, it's engaging enough, but the history never leaves our side, right? So can you kind of talk to that a little bit to get us started tonight?
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And Ron, like, you've been doing this for so long, and thank you so much. I appreciate the hard work you're doing in our community to make sure that people continue reading and thinking about books and getting access to books. I mean, it's a really, sometimes it's a thankless job, right? Because people don't see all the invisible work you're doing, but I see it and I really appreciate it. So
thank you.
And so thank you, Brendan, also for the question. And I love that you're thinking about the craft. I have to say that in most realms, like in particular for writers of color, when you go to many places like to speak, often people want to talk about what happened in the story, but they don't really look at the craft. It's almost like a second thought, which I think is interesting. And when people pay attention to that, I'm very happy because it took me so long to write this book and make it work. And sometimes it looks, the simplicity of it. It's again, like that kind of, I wanted it to feel like I wasn't doing anything at all. Like it was easy, but actually to bring all these things together was actually very, very hard for me. I wrote the book, it took me 10 years. The first version of the book was written in the 70s because this was inspired by my mother's story. My mother came to the United States in the 70s. She was 15 years old and married to a man twice her age, who was my father, was incredibly abusive. And I wrote the 70s version of this book. And when I started digging around, because, you know, I was born in 72, I didn't really know that much. I was a baby. So I had to dig around and figure out, oh, what was going on in that time? And one of the things I love doing is looking at newspapers, and really Dominicans, there's so little documentation on Dominicans in the official archives, let's say news, even official archives, let's say, of like photographs, etc. And I was having trouble. So what I started asking questions to people, like living historians, right? Like, we're all living historians in some way. We're experiencing life. And if we sit down and ask someone who lived in the 60s and 70s, they'll start mapping the city in a way based on what was important to them, right? And what I noticed by asking all these elders is moments in history that I learned in books. I mean, I grew up across the street from the Audubon Ballroom. Like, my window, my view is the Audubon Ballroom, my living room. And I didn't know that history until I got to the university, right? And I said, how did I go to a school around the block? How did I grow up looking at this building and not know anything about Malcolm X? I'll tell you what I did know about that building. I knew that my uncles would go dancing there at the ballroom, and there was a Spanish language movie theater there, because that was what's important to them. But other things that happened in that building, they didn't know about or care about. And in fact, I remember, like, when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of, they were kind of demonstrations against the hospital to take that building back and turn it into a community center, right, in the name of Malcolm X. And from my window, I remember this, my mother and father saying, you know, like, or people in my family saying, oh, they're always making trouble. Who are they? They were African Americans, right? Like, they're always like making trouble, like they just don't let it be. And I was just like, there's a kind of a dissonance in, you know, in the narrative, because the truth is that when I went to college and I discovered that the work of Malcolm X and the civil rights movement really was about the emancipation of all people, especially Latinx immigrant communities who benefited because we are part of the Black diaspora. So for me, like, writing a book, if I would have written it in this moment, of course, there's a lot of important things to talk about in this moment. But I thought, what were we doing during the civil rights movement? Were we like, how were we participating or not participating? And by looking at history and the ways that people participate or not participate, we can sort of think about what we're not doing right now that is urgent, right? Kind of like the civil rights movement, I would say climate is one of them, right? We're in a climate emergency, and most of us move in the world as if that's not a real thing or participate in those things. And, you know, people who really think about climate say, oh, in 20 years, when we look at 2020, everyone's gonna be like, what were you doing? What were you doing when we were at an emergency? In the same way that, you know, when I was interviewing Dominicans who were in New York City in the 60s and 70s, and all they were, I mean, they really were struggling though. Like, they were like getting the shittiest jobs. They were totally precarious jobs. They didn't speak the language. They were just like, we were just trying to survive. Like, we had to feed a family with, you know, like a few dollars. Like, some days we didn't even eat. There's not a lot of time when you're really struggling to think about, let's be part of a movement, right? You're new, you're scared, you're undocumented. I mean, a lot of my family was undocumented for a really good period of time. They were working in factories where, like, people weren't getting paid. They would work for a few weeks, and then, like, the bosses would switch it up, and suddenly, like, nobody got paid. It's scary shit, right? So I don't think anyone is bad. Like, I don't want to be judgmental of the lack of participation, but that's what got me thinking, like, what keeps us, like, what can we learn from history that keeps us from paying attention to things that actually are really important to our well-being and our children's well-being in the long term, right? And that's what got me writing about the 60s and thinking about it and just wanting to bring it into the book so those discussions could happen.
Yeah, and it's you do a really good job at it. We've definitely had those discussions. Even it's it's very subtle, right? The way that the way that race and civil rights are appear very mildly, you know, almost like a spark. If you blink, you'll miss it. However, you can't get away from it either, right?
You don't miss it if you're Black, though. You don't miss it if you're Black, because we know that's how it plays out in our communities, right? Like you could have one mother who is playing out colorism in the dinner, around the dinner table, right? And it's really subtle. But how painful is it when you're the one being subjected to the abuse or the violence of not being seen or accepted or loved because of, you know, things that are connected to colorism or race, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it's funny because I have very different conversations about that subtlety in different communities. You know,
do you mean?
Like when I'm talking to communities like ours, right? Like I wrote the book, everyone gets it really fast. They're like, oh my God, I recognize this completely because I've been in those circles. You know what I mean? I've negotiated those subtleties, those little microaggressions that we experience every day. So that's what I'm saying.
Right. And in other communities, what I'm asking is like, what are the kind of some of the things that come up that aren't so familiar, that people don't get immediately? Like, I'm curious, what
I think
people question if you're telling the truth in a sense.
No, I think that people pay attention to the thing that's interesting to them or the thing that speaks to them, right? So what's interesting, I never thought, you know, I went to Kentucky to this weird festival, but it was like very weird because it was in Wichita, Kentucky. But the majority of the demographic, they were white women over 70 years old. They were all like retired. And, you know, and what was crazy is that they loved the book Dominicana because they said that they identified with the domestic labor and being married young and feeling trapped. And it was so like, oh my God, this is my demographic too. Like, you know, sometimes you don't even understand who the demographic for the book is. But if you think about, especially in Midwestern states and definitely in the South, like, and maybe even up north in certain states and cities, how many people, especially older generations, right, would get married in, you know, at 17, 18, 19, 20 to men that were 28, 29, 30. And a lot of these women were like, yeah, in my first marriage, it was very hard. I married a very difficult person. I really appreciated your book because I felt like it was my story. And that's all they would say. And I said, you don't have to say any more because I understand what you're saying when you say difficult. Right? So, yeah. So colorism wouldn't even come up because when they're reading it, what they're reading is this, like they're thinking about the marriage, or some people would be thinking about immigration, or some people would be thinking about housework, right? Like a lot of people were very interested in how much housework there like
there's a lot of it.
A lot of the coffee making and stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Does anyone want to chime in? I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
I'll get it started.
I had a
go
question.
Ahead. Who had a question? Who was that?
That was Margaret.
Margaret and then Tony.
Angie, I love the way can you hear me, Angie?
Yes, I do.
I love the way you filter in your figurative language. The dead fly is mentioned first, and then it comes up a little later. The puffer fish is mentioned, and then it comes up a little later. I love the way you so narratively, aesthetically weave it in. I have a question about some stereotypes I've been hearing since I've been talking about a Dominican Republic. I've been doing some little research on it. And this one stereotype is that Haitians and Dominicans don't get along. Haitians and Dominicans don't get along. So I wondered, could you speak on that?
Well, I mean, I think that is not as, you know, it's like saying white and Black people don't get along, right? Like, or people don't like Mexicans. Like, I think that is really complicated. You know, the dictator Trujillo, who was a dictator in Dominican Republic for over 31 years, like he was part Haitian, right? So he embodied both. And he didn't get along with Haitians. He's responsible for the massacre of like 15 to 20,000 Haitians in 1937. So I think like it's really complicated. Like the fact is that Dominican Republic has very violent deportation laws that have extracted Dominican-born Haitians who live in Dominican Republic and have never lived anywhere else and have tried to extract them from Dominican Republic. They repealed their citizenship back to 1892, which is insane, right? So imagine that happening in the US. So, you know, we have our own problems here around Mexico and, you know, in Guatemala and the Central Americans and what's happening at the border and detention centers. Similar stuff is happening there. So because of the miseducation of so many Dominicans in the schools and in the news throughout from that dictatorship, which is all miseducation, I think that in the end, like people don't really know, they're educated in a certain way. They think that Haitians are invading Dominican Republic. They believe Haitians are the reason for the economic downfall of the country or the cultural downfall of the country, because that was part of the dictatorship's agenda, right? To whiten the country or to build it or to gain more power. So this education requires re-education, and there's a huge movement that identifies Dominicans in alliance with Haitians, trying to shift that. And I'm really, really excited about young people who are standing up against this narrative, because the stereotype is, but actually, in actuality, when you're there, there's a lot of coalition building among youth, especially, and elders. Like we have in my family, a lot of Haitian family, right? So to say we hate, it's like saying I hate my family, like no, right? Like it's really miseducation. So it's hard to speak in that way in these general terms when it's actually very nuanced, and it's about miseducation, right? Like in the same ways that happens in this country, like what's happening to Asian Americans, why are they being attacked by all our communities, Black, Latino, and white are attacking Asian American communities? It's miseducation, misinformation. And it's really unfortunate. So yeah, that's what I would say about that situation.
Thank you,
Did
Angie.
you want to chime in?
Tony, did you have a question?
Tony, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Angie Cruz, I absolutely love the novel. I could not put it down until I finished it. and so the end of my semester was just completely shot, but it was all worth it. But about the Haitian Dominican thing, just like a simple introduction to the history might be Henry Louis Gates' series. It's on YouTube, and it has one of the episodes is Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But yeah, it is a really complicated and intricate history. But I want to say that I absolutely loved the fact that you left out quotation marks like throughout the novel. And so I've never seen that before. I can't remember ever seeing that before. And I loved it because I think it puts you in Ana's head, right? So you're in Ana the whole time, which I absolutely loved. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, in my, what I imagine is that Ana never, right? Like, as we know, she doesn't speak English, right? So if this book were to be written in Spanish, in her native language, there would be no quotation marks. Those signifiers don't actually exist in Spanish text, right? So that's one reason. But also, I feel like for me, and actually a number of Latinx writers don't use quotation marks for this reason too. There's a way that quotation marks create kind of a hierarchy in what we think versus what we say. And also, even as a reader, there's a way that people either, like when there's conversation, they'll just read the dialogue and skip what happens in between because they just want to hear what they're going to say next. And in some ways, what it does is like it forces the reader to actually also engage thoughts and setting and all these other things. So.
Yeah, I have a simple question. And when I read, like now I'm getting into other authors like Julia Alvarez and Muchacho Ese. When you say Dominican Republic, you don't say the Dominican Republic. Is that deliberate, or is it that I have a problem? Because, you know, it's like in Spanish, La República Dominicana, ¿verdad? So every time you wrote the DR, you didn't put the. And I don't know, for some reason, it just bothered me. I'm like, why is she leaving the article the out? But, you know, it didn't stop me from enjoying the book, which I do love.
I love that comment because honestly, I'm not a Spanish speaker. I mean, I speak Spanish like a baby. Like I grew up speaking Spanish with my family, but as soon as I entered school, I switched, right? So I'm one of those. And I actually, my Spanish is quite bad. And what's been really fun, so here I am trying to write a book from the point of view of characters that don't speak English, and I'm translating how I understand Spanish, right? So obviously, if I would have had you, Ana, read the proof, I might have changed that, right?
Serious?
But I have to say, I'm really excited because Dominicana has just been translated in Spanish by a Dominican author, Kiana Antigua, who's amazing. And she translated the book into Dominican. And if you are interested in translation in Spanish, it's so good. Actually, you can listen to it too, because she does the audiobook. And it made me think, oh my God, it's my book in full color. I could have never written it like that because I don't speak Spanish, but she actually fixed a lot of those things. Oh, so in Spanish, she did all this stuff, but she's like, she goes, I think you meant to say this. I said, no, exactly, that's what I meant to say. So it's like another book. It's so fun to watch what she did with it. And yeah, so it comes out in a few weeks. I'm really excited to see people's reactions to it.
Cool.
I have a quick question just following up on that because, because you said that she also did the narration for the book. And I'm just curious about the tone, right? Because this, she's a child from un pueblo, una campesina, for lack of a better word. So there's an innocence to it, but she matures because of the life that she has when she comes to the state. So I'm just wondering the tone that you can expect when you hear. I don't typically listen to books. I can't. I start doing other things, but I'm just curious about it, especially because it's in Spanish. Because even when I was reading the book, I was just, the first thing that came into my head was like, why aren't there more Spanish phrases? Because you knew off the bat that of course she doesn't speak English. And I thought it was very good how, when he came and he was looking for a job, and you did what my mom did and my father did, butcher the English language, like times versus steamy square. So I'm just curious to just the tone that the narration went.
Well, I didn't use Spanish. I try not to use Spanish in this particular book. If you read my other books, I use a lot more Spanish, but in this particular book, I wanted the reader to understand that these characters only spoke Spanish. And if I switched, they would think they code switch. Like there's something that happens to our brain. We're like, oh, they're code switchers, and they're not code switchers. They only speak Spanish. So what I try to do is sometimes I would write sentences syntactically like English, like Spanish, so you can feel the Spanish under the English, right? So, I wasn't trying to do the perfect translation. I was trying to do the translation that reminded the reader that they were Spanish speakers. Yeah.
And I had a question along those lines. I think it comes across particularly well that the parts that are meant to be Spanish are written in English. And I'm just wondering, back to a craft question, is that something you had planned from the outset? Is it something you went back and forth on? Did you have to fight an editor on that? Had you planned from the beginning to write the Spanish spoken portions in English?
This book went through many revisions, and in the last revision, I I'm very lucky. I'm, you know, I have really great readers, and someone had said, you know, these characters speaking Spanish, right? I was like, yeah. She's like, oh, okay. Like here I'm confused. Like I can't tell like what's happening with the diction or whatever. So I went and I said, you know, let me go really consciously and rewrite certain sections in this way so it's consistent. You know, and the way, I mean, it sounds like a lot of you are writers because you're asking a lot of craft questions. So I'm just going to tell you, like, you know, I teach an MFA and I tell my students, you know, books are really overwhelming. And when you read a book that's already published, it feels so seamless in some ways, right? And when you're writing your own book, you're like, oh my God, I have these beautiful thoughts and I compose these beautiful sentences in my head. And when I put it on paper, it's not beautiful. Why? Like, I want it to look like it looks like in a book. Well, one of the reasons that books are so great once you get them is because they've gone through so many revisions, right? Yeah. So what I usually tell my students who are working is I say, okay, you know, first you tackle the big problems, and the big problems are the architecture of a building. Like if you don't have those beams, if anyone's ever seen a building go up, like if you don't have like the skeleton and the thing that's holding it up, there's no building, right? Like that thing is gonna collapse. So you start with that, and that structure and plot and kind of the narrative, like who are the main characters and what's gonna happen to them. Once you figure those things out, then you're like, oh, okay, what do they sound like? Everybody has their own voice, right? Like we all speak differently. You all have different tones and everything. Then you literally go and what I do is just edit and just revise the dialogue. I'm like, I revised only Teresa. And then I revised only, you know, I went consistently. I was like, Teresa always sounds like this because Teresa is this kind of person, right? Like she's snappy and whatever. Or like I'll say, you know, Juan is consistently like this. And I would check to make sure that it's consistent throughout the book, right? And try to create things that would make them different enough. So when the characters switch voice, you know already through the voice that it's somebody else, you know? And then it would be setting. And then the last thing was the Spanish, like, do I really need, I don't need to code switch. Actually, I could just write the English so it sounds like Spanish. So it's a layered kind of revision. Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
If I can chime in, Angie, I just want to say that I also love the book. I do appreciate that you kept it in English because like you said, when you go back and forth from the Spanish to the English, you can kind of get lost into all the translation. I do have to say that I listened to the audiobook and there were phrases that you chose to put in Spanish, and when Coral was reading them, she didn't pronounce them correctly. And that made me cringe. Like it cemented in my head, like when she said that Juan brought the Barceló Añejo, she said it completely different. And I was like, no, you say Barceló Añejo, you know? So little things like that. But my question is, I know that you said that the story of Ana was inspired or loosely based on your mom. How much of the entire story was based on people that you know, and how did, you know, like how do you research those characters and how do you put those stories together?
Well, you know, I was really interested in my mother's story, but also because I moved away from the Heights. Like all my family still lives in Washington Heights. And I left to teach in Texas, and then I left to teach in Pittsburgh. And I felt very estranged from my family, almost like I did this American thing where I went away for a job. And I think that it was a little heartbreaking for everybody, even me, because I realized that when I would come back and visit, like I no longer was part of their conversation. Like they had their chisme, they had their thing, and they had their inside jokes, but I wasn't part of it, you know? And it kind of felt sad. Like, what is the price of social mobility? Or like, it sucks, right? So writing the book, I was like asking more questions about who was my mom, like who is this woman, like why does she make the choices? And so that was like the first thing I did, right? And I started asking different people in my family about that wedding, because you know my father did propose to my mother when she was 11, and I was just kind of like, what is that like? How do you live with that trauma? Like there was trauma there. And, you know, even though we don't talk about trauma, and we don't talk about sadness, and we don't talk about any of those things. Like that's not something that we talk about in my family. but me asking those questions and then asking different people, like my grandmother, like, oh, what was that proposal look like? Like, what were you doing? How were you encouraging? And everyone had a different frame for it. And that's what got me excited. So I got the heart of the story in a sense, but then I realized that I didn't want to write about what happened. I wanted to write, it's a novel, right? I'm a fiction writer. I wanted to write the thing that I thought, what is the most impossible thing that could happen here? And I asked my mother, I said, Mom, if you could imagine anything happening in your life that hasn't happened, what would be the thing that you would want to happen and you can't imagine ever happening? And she said, I don't think I'm ever going to fall in love. And when she said that, I said, what do you mean you're never going to fall in love? I mean, now she's in her 60s. And she said, yeah, I don't think, like, I never have, and I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think that's it.
No, tell her no.
And it was so heartbreaking. Like, I was just like, I fall in love every other minute. Like, all you need to do is, you got a job, great. Like, it's like not that hard. I get there fast. But she really struggles. And then I was like thinking about, oh, what are these kind of traumas do to people that shut them down and not allow them to let themselves go and all this stuff. So the first versions of the book were closer to what I thought was the real story, even though really nobody tells me their story. So I'm basically piecing from many stories a story. But as I progressed, the book started becoming about what if a person like my mother, this is when Ana really became Ana and not anyone in my family. What if I write this girl allowing herself to fall for someone? Mm-hmm. And that was the big change, right? So, yeah.
What, falling for Gabriel or for Cesar?
Both.
I love Cesar.
It's a scandal, you know?
Yeah.
I love him.
I relate more to Cesar than any of the other characters. He's wonderful.
Oh. I was also going to say that I could totally relate to Ana's story because my grandmother married my grandfather at 12 and they had 16 children.
Wow.
And they were married for over 80 years. So, I mean, like, it was normal for you to be 12, 13, 14 and married. He was 21 when they married. So.
Wow. Yeah, it's old school.
And people talk about it as a past thing, though. They just passed the child bride law in DR.
Wow.
Because I still is a fact. I think I keep forgetting the statistic, but it's like 30% of girls under 15 are already married or in a relationship. Most of them are older men. Due to the fact that it's really hard to be sovereign as a woman, if you're not married or you're not, or in some kind of situation.
Is that certain sections in the DR or not in
It's about the country. It's like, these are statistics from the World Bank, right? And then by the time I'm 18, I think the number goes up to like very, very high. It's very high. But they just passed a law that they're hoping could shift that a little bit. So mothers just don't marry their daughters, because it's also, there's a lot of laws, right? So abortion is illegal. In many countries in Latin America, if you rape a girl, a minor, if you marry them, it's no longer criminal, right? So if you think about all the ways laws and systems enforce these kinds of things, right? If you can't have an abortion and you can't support yourself and then you have a child, then again, like, these are all things that create problems. So I think, so it's not a past thing. It's actually a current struggle. And, it's really, and domestic violence, like, everybody in the world, like, it has escalated the pandemic all over the world, including the United States. Like, so all these issues are not something that are past, even though people, this is like, you want to think it's outside, but actually, and New York City just changed their child bride law too. I think up until 2 years ago, it was legal to marry at 14. So it happens here, less prevalent, but it does happen. There's
Sam,
more
were you
child
gonna-
protection.
Sam, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Angie, I love the book, what we've read so far. And my question to you is, what inspires you to write? And when your mom read the book, if she did read the book, and if she had read the book, how did she like it? Like, what was her feedback from the book, or your family's feedback if they read it?
She loved the book. She read the book. She said it was my best book yet, which was good. But really, like, what was most beautiful is that she said, you know, she goes, Angie, I read that book. She goes, it wasn't my life, but it felt like experiences that I must have had that I don't remember. And it was so powerful, right? Like, and I also think, like, what was great, because we don't, she's a very quiet person. She does not talk about anything. She'll say, todo está bien, everything is fine, you know, that's it. Like, what is there to say, you know? But I felt that after that book, like, it's almost like it was proof that I hadn't forgotten about her. As I was moving in the world, like, I was, like, she felt like it was almost like I didn't just go away and become La Americana and got a job and moved up, you know. It's almost like she realized I was paying attention to her all these years. And for me, that was really important.
That's pretty awesome. And you know what's weird about what you say? When we're around my mom is in her 80s, and when we're around her, the 5 of her children, and we bring up different things that we've experienced growing up with my mom looks at us and says, I don't remember that. When did that happen? Wait a minute, when did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we laugh at her and we're like, Mom, you don't remember when that situation happened? And she honestly doesn't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's just weird. And you
Don't
saying
laugh at her. She's
But
getting
also,
old.
but this is another thing. And I, you know, for those of you who are writers and want to write your family stories, like, I feel like there was, when I was a younger person, a younger version of me, when I was asking these questions, I kind of was like, why can't you talk about it? You know what I mean? Like, tell me, I want to know, like, if I had a right to that story. And what I realize now is that the reason people can't talk about it is because of trauma, right? Like, and what are we doing when we ask these questions of anyone? I see a lot of my, you know, young people who go home and they're like mad at their parents, and, you know, and trying to hold them accountable for the abuses they've done when they, you know, like all the things that their parents might have done or whatever it is that they're trying to hold them accountable for. And they're kind of like bringing all this stuff up, right? Like, sort of shaking the waters. And I said, that is great, but you can't expect people, without giving them the resources for mental health, like therapy, like language, like all the things that make someone woke suddenly about, like, even to say, I want to hold you accountable requires a ton of resources. That means that you've accessed, you could even say that you have trauma. That's also just to say, that's also a resource, right? This is new language. And I think that, and kind of excavate that without making sure that they have support to bring that up in their bodies is, I think, a little bit dangerous. And I realize that now. Like, it's not like I could have told my mother, so what was it like when you were 15? And, you know, like, without having the education to facilitate a way for her to move through it, because it would have been unfair. And I could have really fucked up her life, because part of the forgetting is to be functional. If you really stay in your sadness, how are you going to show up to work the next day?
You mentioned that you're a fiction writer, and that influenced how you approach this narrative. Is that a hard line? Are fiction writers not memoirists, and vice versa? And if had you, I think you just said it, if you had approached it as, you know, nonfiction, as a memoir, it would have caused your mother more trauma, maybe even caused you more trauma to be able to tell the story, you know, in the, you know, under the lens of truth.
Well, I mean, I think that there's many beautiful nonfiction books that deal with similar subjects. Maybe not about Latinx women, because unfortunately we have a dearth of books dealing with these subjects by Latinx women. But I think for me, it's not about fiction or nonfiction. Like, I just love writing fiction because I like to think outside the box. I like to think, what else can happen here? Because I already know what happened.
Right.
I'm not interested in what happened. I'm interested in what else can happen. And I think it's because I'm so interested in social justice, and, you know, I just don't want to accept that the world is what it is. I want to understand, like, what else can happen that's not this very grief-ridden, you know, inequitable, problematic world, right? So I use fiction as a way to think about, you know, like, even in the story of Ana, like, in the end, like, what happened, I won't say what the end happens, but like, I was like, I really thought about it, like, what could happen to her in the end with her relationship with her mother? Like, is it the way that it's gonna, you know, like, is it the expected way? It, like, what else can we learn? Like, how can mothers change? You know, all these different things. Like, that's why I write fiction. Now, people who write nonfiction, it has a different role, I think, in the conversation, and it's important too. But I'm not as interested about that. Yeah. Just as a writer. But I do write some nonfiction. But I find myself, I like to make stuff up.
But you need the nonfiction to start off with.
Totally. I like the oral stories, and I think they're really important. And I think it's important even for people to tell their stories. Just talking about your life, like, I see the change and the lift and the light that comes out when people are able to actually tell their stories. It's a beautiful process.
What was the dynamic? Like, first you say your mother is shy, right? And then you asking her about a traumatic time in her life, and then you tell her, oh, and I'm going to write a book about it, and millions of people are going to read about how you did, you know. And then how does she react to that?
Well,
like,
you know,
don't you dare write that.
You know, I think that actually my mother, because, you know, all she wants is for me to have a job with benefits. This is like her only goal in life. She doesn't care what I do. I could be a janitor. I could be whatever. She just wants security, security, security.
Yeah.
And she said, she was like, she goes, bueno, yo no tengo nada que decir. Like, I don't know what you want to know, because what happened to me is not that interesting. But she said, you know, like, she was like, she goes, but if you want, I can make stuff up so you can make money, because what we need is money, you know? And the truth is, you know, I've been writing for 20 years, and most of my family hasn't really acknowledged it as like a thing, because they're like, what do you do? Write books? Like, who cares? But this book, Dominicana, when it got picked by Good Morning America, and it was on the Jumbotron in Washington Heights, all my cousins read the book. Because they were like, oh shit, I didn't know you were a writer. You're pretty good at it. You should keep doing that.
It's like you won the
20
lottery.
years later, you know?
Well, it takes that. It takes that sometimes.
But I have to say, like, it was beautiful to get the men in my family, the young people, they're all in their 30s, right? Like, to read the book, because a lot of them started talking about domestic violence for the first time. And this is why I think boys should read this book, like young men should read this book, because it's like, I never thought about it, but, you know, I think my mom had it really hard. Their own moms, you know, they were like, now that I think about it, and they started piecing things together that they hadn't even thought to ask or question, because nobody talks about it. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's happening.
It's delicate.
It's delicate. But through the book, they kind of were just like, I'm going to go visit mom. I'm going to go hug her. Because sometimes we're really hard on the women in our family, right? Like, we don't understand why they're hard or why they're short or on us or whatever. And I think they started being more compassion for them.
Question. Why Dominicana? I'm just curious about the title. If you went through, was it called something else? What did you decide at the end? Did you decide in the middle? Because it resonates regardless if you're Dominican or not. You know, my family immigrated to the States, so a lot of it resonates too. So it could be anyone's story, to tell you the truth. So but I know one of my best friends is Dominican, and I was like, I'm gonna read Dominicana, and she's like, when you're done, pass it to me, because until I had seen the book everywhere, and I'm like, I'm gonna read it without even knowing what it was about, just because of the title. Even though my family's not Dominican, we're Hondureños, but it resonated, right, to me. So I'm just curious about the title.
Well, titles are hard. I suck at them. But the original title was In Search of Caridad. And there's a character called Caridad, as all of you know, the lover. And that was my original story. One version of the book was really about the triangle between Juan, Ana, and Caridad. And the mystery of Caridad and who this woman was, and who eventually, my son is home. He's like, where's the food? Okay. But it was a triangle of like, Caridad saved, in real life, Caridad saved my mother's life. And she was my father's lover. And she was of age. She was a woman. She was like in her 30s, right? Like, and I thought, oh my God, this book is about sisterhood, right? Like, it's not about like, a lot of the narratives of these kind of situations are usually catty or kind of they're in competition or whatever. But my mother, and that was also one of the seeds of the book, which I just remembered now, was I asked my mother, I said, oh, what are some of your regrets? And she said, I regret not thanking Caridad for saving my life. Because she's like, I was so young and I never, and I was in the hospital and she took care of you when you were born, and, and now she's passed away. She got cancer early and passed away. So my mother never really was able, when she was aware that she could reach her, she wasn't able to like reach her. And she says, I regret it because I'm really grateful for her. And I thought, oh, like, so it's In Search of Caridad. But then Dominicana, nobody liked the publisher, like it wasn't a catchy title. And I was with a friend and she goes, well, tell me what your book is about. And I said, well, it's about a Dominicana. Her name is Ana. And then it's like, oh, Dominicana and Ana rhyme. Oh, Ana's inside Dominicana. And then suddenly I was like, oh, that's what it's going to be called. And then, strangely, this doll, some of you might, so in the book, there's a lot of these dolls. They're like touristic dolls.
Muñecas sin cara.
Yeah, muñecas sin caras. They're also called Dominicanas, which I didn't really understand until the book was finished. And I said, oh my God, it's so perfect,
But you're right about Cortejas in the family, because it's like, my background is Puerto Rican, and there were always Cortejas, which means, extended lovers, especially more for men though. Because if a woman did it, she was a prostitute, she was a hoe, she was a puta. But if a man did it, it's okay. It's a corteja. That's the one he had on the side. As long as he comes home and feeds you and feeds the kids.
Novia while he's married.
Que novia, corteja.
It's true. Oh my God, guys, I love you guys and you're amazing. I have to go because family.
You got to feed your son.
Yeah, he's 13.
Se ponga a cocinar.
Yeah.
He does, but.
Thank you so much.
Any last question before I take off? Does anyone want to ask the last question?
I have a last question.
Oh, I had a quick question too.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll take two. I'll take two last questions.
So hang on, I think Barbara had a question and Sorada had a question because they didn't ask questions yet.
Okay.
My question was just really quick. Dominicana, is that the name of your piggy bank?
Yeah.
Okay. Was it because of those little figures?
Yeah. Well, this one, someone gave it to me and it has a hole in it. And I thought, I wonder if I was trying to hide money, this would be a good place.
Oh, okay. And they're called Dominicana. Oh, got it. Thank you.
And Sorada?
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but I'll say it out loud. So Teresa is like a minor character, but I really liked her as a character. And I was just wondering, where did she come from? Was she inspired by anyone in your real life?
I mean, my mother does have sisters, but Teresa, I wanted to have a character that didn't do what the mother told her to do, and that took a different path and really was of her own mind, and who would go against the plot of marrying Ana. So so yeah, no, I made her to be a I imagined her to be a contrast. I mean, she had to have a lot of siblings. I could only imagine Ana with many siblings. So, and Teresa would have to go against this kind of, let's go to America and like, you know. So that's how she showed up. But I love Teresa. I can't wait, you know, this is going to be a movie, I think. And I can't wait to see Teresa, because I think that's going to be a really fun part.
I agree.
Muchísimas gracias, Angie.
Muchas gracias, ustedes. Thank you so much for spending this time with my book. I really appreciate it. If you have extra questions, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. You can DM me. My DMs are open. I'm really happy to respond. And I really appreciate, Ron, everything you're doing. Thank you so much.
Angie, we appreciate you for coming and spending some time answering some questions tonight. Again, if you want to follow up with Angie, she is on Instagram. I see her son still pulling at her. So we won't hold her anymore, but thank you so much, Angie, for coming.
Can I say one more thing? For those of you interested as writers and or how I did the history, I looked into people's photo albums, and on Instagram, I actually have an Instagram archive that's growing. So if any of you are Dominicans from New York City or know Dominicans who were here in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, send me photos for the archive. Basically, it's just people telling their stories and their images, and they're fantastic. So it's a way to support like this rich body of stories of women. So please.
You know, the first Latino who came to New York City was a Dominican que se llamaba Juan. Yes.
One other thing, Cleva Cruz, who is in our book club, was recruited by Angie to go to University of Pittsburgh, where he's getting his MFA there. Angie?
Yes.
So Cleva is normally with us. He's probably busy tonight. But so we have even a deeper connection with Angie and the book club. So thank you again, Angie. Yeah, he's great. He's great.
My literary son, I call him.
We're waiting for his book next. But thank you so much.
Go feed your other son.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
So we can continue talking about the book, whatever you like.
Ron, I want to ask her a question about her sexual details.
Okay.
My field of study is young adult literature. The genre of young adult literature, I would love to promote her book, in terms of diversity and all of that. And she can write, her narrative style and all of that, creativity. But the sexual details, I was going to ask her, how can you explain to a group of teachers your book is excellent in terms of the narrative and in terms of the sharing of different cultures, but how can you account for the sexual details in terms of being young adult literature?
But I don't think she's writing for the young adult market. So I mean, if she's not writing for that market, she's not going to take teens into consideration, even though there are young characters in the book, Ana, the main character, but she's really writing for an adult audience. So,
but it makes for good young adult literature.
And I think young adults read everything now.
Yeah,
so
excellent. But
don't think like they don't know about sexual, encounters and stuff.
It's
my plate.
That's what I'm mature about it.
That's what I was gonna say. You can't put anything on a piece of paper that these young kids have not read, seen. Did. Oh my God, they could probably teach everybody in this video a little something.
Right.
But I understand what Margaret's saying. Because
they need to read it.
Yeah, I mean, I read it from that lens also because of my work with students in the high school, and I'm always trying to pass along books or include these books in the curriculum. I did have some pause with some of those scenes. They can read it on their own all they want, but I have to be mindful about what I'm saying is coming from the classroom in front of them. There's a line there.
You'll wind
Right.
up in the rubber room.
Definitely.
She
Definitely
does
not.
have other books that might be more appropriate
Yeah.
for younger readers. I haven't read the other books, but you know, she's been writing. This is her third or fourth book, and she's been writing for 20 years now. So it is possible that her earlier books are more appropriate for younger readers.
Yeah.
Also, just I can speak to that as well, Dr. Bristow. When there's a writer where you can't use their actual work because your students are either high school, middle school, which I've run into that problem too. It's too mature of content, but you feel like their message is something that needs to get out. Especially if it's a writer that's been around for a while, you need to look up, see if they have any sort of speeches on YouTube, any talks they've done. I've done that myself where like I wanted to do like Chimamanda, but like it was too mature for like an 8th grade class. So like I literally found a TED talk and I used that for however many years I was in the classroom. Even my fiance, she uses it with her high school kids. It's like, even if their books get a little too risque with the material, you can find other things they've done, whether it's speeches or interviews, that still speak to those themes, then I find that that's pretty useful.
Even short stories, she may have short stories out there that don't go as far as the novel goes, but exposes them to, you know, she talked about she's very sensitive to lots of things, and you know, exposing, you know, sharing with people those sensitivities is important. So maybe she got some short stories out there that would be appropriate to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
she
you,
also, she also
Jenna.
edits a literary journal out of the University of Pittsburgh. That won't be her writing, but she might be collecting or editing writing that is within her interests and genre. So, and you'll also be exposed to other writers in the journal.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you, Margaret, for that question.
How did y'all feel about Angie? She was really cool. I didn't expect her to be so laid back.
Me too. Did she use the word F-U-C-K freely?
She is over 18.
Yeah, I admire her for doing that. You know,
and she does pay taxes.
Yes,
so.
I admire her for being loose with her language. You know, I was just wondering, did I hear it correctly?
What she said?
She used the fucked. Somebody fucked up or something.
Oh, now you overusing it.
No, I just thought I heard her use that. I thought I heard her use it. You know,
she sure did.
It's possible.
So I did hear it right correctly. Okay.
You know, I just want to say I was really blown away by that little shift in perspective she talked about. You know, had she written the story from the point of view of this love triangle, we would have known Juan. And she said that right after saying that the men in her family are reading the story and thinking differently about the women in their lives. So if telling the story from Ana's perspective, we got to know Cesar, we got to know Gabrielle, we got to know a lot of different men and maybe see an alternative because you know, boys, we emulate what we see. And if all they see is Juan, he's a superstar, he goes to New York, they're not going to know about these other men. So I thought that was a really important shift for her to take.
Yeah.
And exposes it to just people who are going to benefit from that story who wouldn't have benefited had they just seen the love triangle.
That's rewarding.
One question. You go ahead, Myra.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's so hard, right, when we're all speaking over each other.
All right.
But I think when she said that, it took me by surprise. And I was like, I don't know if I would have appreciated the story in the same way if she would have taken that angle. And even the simplicity of how she got to the title in itself. Like when she mentioned the first title, it sort of reminded me, and I read this book and I'm always forgetting the name of the title. The one about the 3 Dominican sisters who were killed under the dictatorship.
In the Times of the Butterflies.
In the Times of the Butterfly. And when she said the original title, in my head, I would have probably dismissed it just because I'm thinking, oh, Trujillo, Dominican story. But I appreciate it, even though she said she sucks that title, but I really like the simplicity of it. That first title reminded me of that other book, like right off the bat.
But also I think her tone has a lot to do with it, because when we're reading the book, Ana is never angry. Like Ana is not, let me rephrase that. She's not angry at Caridad. You know what I'm saying? Like, I never get that she's angry at Caridad, you know? It's like she feels sorry for her and like she understands her. And when she falls in love, she kind of understands. She's like, oh, this is how she must feel, you know? So it's never like, oh, she's taking my man and she's taking over my life. And it was never like that. It was more from like an understanding place. So I think if the book would have been, you know, looking for Caridad, it would have been another different tone, not the one that she put in Dominicana, you know?
Even the way she imitated her mother, her tone, even when she was imitating her mom, I could kind of see the inflection in the book too. Like when she was saying, you know, mommy said whatever, I could hear her mother through the book in the way that she was imitating her mother.
Good. That's
One thing, you go ahead, Jacqueline.
She's on mute. Oh, okay.
I was just remembering what Jetta mentioned about the perspective of the men that we get in the book, and it made me think about the time Antonio behaved so differently when he came over with friends to buy suits, and that really gave men a different perspective of how women see them, because he was one way when he was by himself, talked of his wife, and just had a totally different perspective. And then when he comes over with his buddies, he's disrespectful. He tries to play the man, even stayed behind. And no, but so that I hadn't thought about that. And when you said that, that definitely gives a different perspective to men, because we're always looking, young men are reading about other men from a totally different, from Juan's perspective, and we're looking at the women's perspective and how men behave.
Or misbehave.
One of the things that I found interesting is she said it took her 10 years to write the book. And I wonder, how deep was she into this book as a love triangle before she realized that that wasn't working, and had to back out of that, rewrite probably a good portion of the book for it to take the current path that it's taken. 10 years is, I mean, people take 10 years to write a book, but it would be interesting to know, like, how deep was she into the book, going in one angle with the Caridad, Juan, and Ana, before she realized, let me back out of that and just make this about Ana and Cesar, really.
Yeah, how much of that, Ron, do you think was kind of due to what Angie was saying about how a lot of the book is fiction, and her mom was like, I can make up some shit if you want me to, like, my life just wasn't that interesting to me? That may have been maybe because her life wasn't that interesting, but possibly because she was just too traumatized to really dig in deep. Like, Ron, do you think that had any, because I agree with you, and do you think that that idea of either mom not being ready to take it there, or both of them, being comfortable with fiction, do you think like that played a role in?
Yeah, I don't know, because if you think about it, Angie did not know the woman, and if I can get my language together, Angie didn't know Caridad in real life. So she really dedicated a lot of time, I'm assuming, to someone she didn't know at all. But in not knowing her, the real Caridad, and not knowing her, she probably had more freedom to craft a character of her own making, because she didn't have the same constraints as crafting Ana, because Ana is based on her mother. Caridad, even though she knows about this woman who really saved her mother's life, as Angie says, in real life, but that's all she knew about Caridad. So if it feels the opposite, like she could have been completely dedicated to this love triangle because she had more freedom as a fiction writer.
Okay.
She says that. Yeah. That's why she likes to write fiction.
Yeah, and she says how her mom regretted not saying thank you to Caridad, the real Caridad, for saving her life. So I think that changes the tone again, from hate to appreciation,
Yeah, And someone else.
Speaking of the length it took her to write, those 10 years, go back to Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Took him 20 years.
Yeah, a lot
to
of books
that.
take a long time.
Yeah, 20 years, and it's a classic, you know. It's worth
Yes, it is.
It was worth the wait.
We sometimes take that for granted when we live in a mass market world that, you know, people are going to be churning out books, you know, every year, or a couple of books. Some writers that churn out books a few books every year, but a lot of writers take 5, 10, 20 years between each book. So yeah, but I guess I'm assuming you'll get a better book that way.
That's not talking about the publishing industry that takes another 5 to 10 years.
Right.
You know, so yeah, it's a lot.
No, it is a lot.
And there's a possibility she might have published them out of order. Like I could see, to Ron's point, she's working on something and the storyline's just not, it's not there. She's hung up on it, and you start working on something else. And that something else may have come out first, and then go back and revisit the thing that you were grappling with, and she turned it from the love triangle to something else. That's a possibility.
Yeah, definitely.
We won't know.
One of my favorite characters, it turns out, was Ana's mother. And Brandon, I remember with our first meeting, you know, you were like team mom, and there was a lot of discussion about that. And I couldn't stand her. But as time went on, I began to understand the kinds of decisions that she made, and she just turned out to be a really complicated character. And so I would have loved to have asked Angie, like, how she managed to put this really complicated character to the page.
What was complicated about her mother?
Sorry?
What was complicated about her mother?
Well, the decision that she made to send her daughter abroad with this man who was twice her age, but they were really poor, and the difficulty of that. But in the way that she did it, it seemed like it was kind of heartless. But then you understand that below that, there is a desire for your child to have a better life than you had, and, you know, the promise of the United States. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about complicated, right?
I see that as cultural, you know, a cultural proclivity, as opposed to complicated.
It's also complicated.
It's part of the culture.
Culture is the most complicated thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it makes it more simpler to understand, which is put it as a cultural proclivity. Cultural, you know, as opposed
I'm not sure everyone would make that same culture, but they would make a different decision, right?
It may seem simple, but the person actually experiencing it is very difficult. Internal struggle.
Yeah. I mean, how difficult is to send your 15-year-old daughter away, you know, out of the country with, you know, someone who has this promise of a better life for her. But I'm also wondering how this book will be received in the Dominican Republic when it's translated into Spanish, into Dominican. That's going to be really, really interesting.
You don't have to, I know a few people have self-identified as Dominican, but were you familiar with the Dominicana? I still don't. Is it a doll? Is it a bank?
Yeah.
It's a doll.
Used as a bank.
It's like a figurine. It's tourist things that she said.
But you put money in it?
No.
She made it into a figurine.
Yeah, she made it a bank.
Ron, you weren't paying attention at the end.
No, in the book, she's putting money in it. In the book, isn't she putting money in it?
Somebody,
it was Carlo, she made it like her.
Yeah, it's a clay doll.
She made it a piggy bank.
Yeah.
Huh?
I have
asked her if she made it a
piggy
bank.
That's
I
it.
have one.
And they have no facial features?
So she put it,
It has no facial features. I've been
wow, that's deep.
More than a lot of my vendors.
Okay.
And then she had one at home with a little hole in it in the bottom, so she right away turned it into a piggy bank for the story.
That's what I was gonna say. The doll is made out of clay.
Yeah.
It's clay doll. And then on the bottom, it has the hole because it's hollow inside. So she said that she turned it and she saw the hole and she said, what would happen if I would put money on it? So that's kind of where that came from. But the doll has no face because people in the Caribbean are so racially mixed that when they made the doll and they were trying to figure out what to put on the face, they couldn't come out with something that was general because we have people that are so white and we have people that are so black and people in between. So it's like, what do we put? So they made the dolls without a face.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It's not
That's
unique.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's not necessarily unique to the, so.
No, it's not.
There's what?
That in Curaçao too.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
We borrow from each other. What do you want?
Yeah, Maddie, you're gonna make me get out my dolls to see whether they have faces. The ones I
What?
bought is, you know, like souvenirs.
As long
Now I
as
wanna
they're
go
not
back, look
Barbie
at the
dolls.
face.
Everybody knows the Barbie doll.
There were definitely some points in the text that
Going back to the book.
I was surprised no one brought up, especially when we were referring to the sayings that were translated. It seems like the sayings that didn't make sense in English that we spent some time talking about last week that were translated. I am curious that no one mentioned that to Angie, but I guess it kind of made sense, at least to me, when she said that she wasn't a Spanish speaker, she didn't speak Spanish fluently. That's when I was like, oh, okay, well then a lot of the language part, it makes even more sense now, you know?
I thought she explained it when she talked about the reader, her wanting the reader to get the idea that they were reading in the language that didn't exist for the characters. So to me, that
Spanish,
right, that they didn't have that language to express themselves, so she had to do it. And that what really surprised me a lot was the fact that she said she doesn't speak Spanish, because
that really surprised me too.
That very surprised me, because I thought she did a really good job at capturing the essence of the immigrant experience, of the Dominican experience. I was able to really relate, although not personally, but just through his stories that I've heard, and I was really able to relate to the character. And I admired it even more, because that's not something that she owns. That's something that she has to kind of research and get. And gave me a lot of hope, because I have sons that are writers, and I like to see that it will still translate, that they're able to capture the essence of their culture, even if they don't do it in their language, that they're still able to capture, although both my sons do speak Spanish. But it's nice to know that as a writer, you can transcend language and able to capture the essence of that without having to do it in that language. So that was
that brings up a bigger, I'm sorry, go ahead, Myra.
Oh, but maybe I was wrong the way I took this, but she also gave the impression that there were certain passages that she sort of wrote, maybe not necessarily in Spanish, but thinking how it would come across in Spanish in order to put it into English writing. That, you know, or was it just me? I think there was a reversal in how she sort of said something along those lines, that she kind of put herself in the position of the character and how they would think about it in Spanish and then sort of narrated it in English.
No, Myra, I think you make a really good point, because what I think Myra and Jacqueline, both your points are just really important to me, because what it does, right, what the writer does in the text is kind of not only who her mother is, but a little bit like Jacqueline was saying about who she is. You know, she's not a Spanish speaker, but she's able to kind of evoke, right, the spirit of the immigrant experience that she didn't necessarily experience. She was able to write a story about someone that did. But you know, what really still kind of shocked me a little bit was when she said that she is kind of an expat, in that sense that she kind of went away from the family and studied and taught in different states. And when she comes back, she doesn't have that connection, you know, yet it's translated well in this. But at the same time, right, she doesn't speak Spanish, and there really isn't a lot of Spanish in the book. Right. So I think like this is an interesting fiction novel, isn't it? By a very interesting writer in that sense, that she's not, this isn't her story, but she's telling it very well. But at the same time, it's still not her story because she's not even connected as I thought she was to the Dominicana culture.
She took on a task. She took on a task to do so much.
She does mention, she didn't mention it here with us, but she does mention in the interview that's in the audiobook that she was born in the United States, but until the age of 16, every summer, she will go and spend her summers in DR. Yes. She did get to live a little bit of the experience, but then when she got older, she went to school, and that's kind of where the disconnect happened. And I think that's something that happens, you know, to a lot of us, because the same thing happened to me. I was born in the United States, but when I was 10 months old, my parents sent me to DR. So I lived in DR until I was 13. So I'm not Dominican because I wasn't born there, but I grew up there. And my first language is Spanish, but I'm American, you know.
You're
like,
bilingual.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I never lost my Spanish because of that, I always say. But that was her story. You know, she was born here, but she kept going over there and kind of looking into the culture, and then she lost the language later on.
I wonder how much are we equating language and culture, that you can be fully Dominican or Honduran or Puerto Rican and not speak Spanish.
I don't know.
I mean, hang on.
Yeah, but can maybe some Spanish people that identify as Dominicano or Latinx, can y'all talk about that? Like, what does it mean to have the language and the culture?
First of all, I don't like that term Latinx.
That's fine that you don't like it. That's totally
because I'm old and I don't like it.
That's totally okay.
But
and I'm with you on that. I feel a little.
What exactly does that mean?
I heard that it meant.
I had a hard enough time with Hispanic.
Non-binary.
What?
Latinx is all-inclusive, and I mean, I do have to agree with the term because I have a daughter that's bisexual, so, and if you talk to her, she'll tell you, I am Dominican, and she speaks a little bit of English, but she's very Dominican. She eats plátanos, and she wants arroz con gandule. She's been away from home for 6 months now. She's away in school, and she's coming home on Friday, and she's like, Mom, why are you cooking? You know, she's very Dominican, you know, so.
Thank goodness. That's it. It's the food, the language.
It's everything, but I don't know if we can say if you don't speak Spanish, you are less of your country.
But if you understand it?
No, my nieces are my nieces are 17 and 15 years old. The two of them don't speak. Not that they don't speak it, it's that they're very bashful about speaking Spanish. My mother would speak to them in Spanish, and they would answer her like straight up English, right? So it's ridiculous. But the girls also spent the summers in Honduras, like every year. We literally spent the holiday in Honduras, Christmas, New Year's. And it didn't, as much as they were speaking to English to everybody in the household, regardless who spoke English, Spanish or not, English or not, because I have a but it just, you know, it's the culture, right? It's the food, true. It's going to the country. My niece, she uses that word Latinx, and I'm like, what does that mean? Because that to me is like foreign. But she identifies herself as a Black Latina.
That's it.
They both do. Despite that they don't speak Spanish, but they strongly identify that way, and they embrace it.
They understand it. They understand it.
No, they understand it enough to have that
conversation. Yeah, well, that's enough.
Anything else, and in school, I mean, they have their highest grades is in Spanish, right? They avoid everything but speaking it, but they embrace everything else. So you can.
Also, just to be clear, it removes gender from from the word.
Exactly what it does.
That's what I was told. Like Latina is like Latino. Like I was told that it removes gender.
All Romance languages are masculine,
right?
By default, and to remove that, and I'm sure we'll see it more going forward. I mean, it's a process. It's a process. All languages evolve.
Mhm.
There is no language that stays the same from the day it was created.
Right.
So, you know, Latinx, I mean, what will happen, sadly, is the old people will die who don't like that word, and the young people will continue to use it.
Yeah.
Until they
That's
die.
Am I the
Then
only
something
person?
else will come up.
Am I the only person upset with the ubiquitous use of you guys? I noticed Angie used it in closing. You guys.
I know, when they're mostly
I mean, all the
women.
things we've done to promote the identity of Black
Yeah, I agree with you, Doctor.
Ron, you're in trouble.
Right.
Especially,
that you
especially.
guys just, you know, I'm like, Lord, what
How about you folks?
folks is fine, you all is fine, ladies and gentlemen is fine. But
Yeah,
that you
but that you
guys makes me
guys.
feel doubly invisible as a Black woman,
I hear you. Let's.
Black and female. I'm invisible all over again.
And I ain't no guy.
Exactly.
Very
You know
interesting.
what I'm talking
No
about?
guy, no
Yeah.
Latin.
You
What do you got?
guys.
You guys.
Even President Obama, you know, as distinctive as he speaks, when he was interviewed by Michelle Norris and Ron, he was interviewed by Elizabeth Alexander. He had a nerve to use you guys, and he was talking to two women.
Say a word about Black Jesus.
He did. Come on now. I won't go that far.
Oh no.
Yeah, President Obama, you guys.
I love Obama.
We are
but I
not
won't go that
equating
far.
Well, I love Obama too. I met him twice, talked with him.
He ain't walk on no water.
No, he's no Messiah.
I did not know
not walk
people
on
felt
water.
such a way
Come on now.
about these things. This is interesting. This is good to know.
We went from Spanish language to Obama to Jesus.
Yeah, so.
To you guys.
Guys,
I'm offended.
I like to know what's the girl's name? As she's known for gender issues, racial gender issues. She teaches law at the University of UCLA. She coined the term intersectionality. You all know what I'm talking about. Kimberly Crenshaw. Right. I'd like to know how she feels about it.
Well, I don't know, Ron. Maybe you can call her up and get her in the book one day.
I have a number. I'll call her right up tonight.
Yeah. And tell her to give us an alternative for you guys.
And Latinx and like anything else.
So it's about 8:31 now. So just want to let everybody know that next week we're discussing, I think, pages 252 all the way through the end of the book. Thank you so much. Nobody gave any spoilers away tonight, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yes.
You're welcome. That's why I stayed quiet, because I couldn't help it. I had to finish it. I had to go all the way to the end. So I was like,
Same here, Lydia.
It was a good read. It's a good read.